Hi, this is Greg Hughes from 90 Second Website Builder. In this video, I want to talk to you about using forms on your website. Forms are a way of collecting data from your website visitors, a way for them to communicate with you, the webmaster, by filling out a form and submitting it to you, and then you getting that data in the form of an email so that you can respond to those customers or those website viewers. 90 Second Website Builder has built-in form functionality that makes this process very easy, so we'll talk about how to get started with that. In the toolbox, you'll find something called Form Controls. This is a collection of the tools that would be used with the form. Probably the easiest way to get started is to look at the Form Wizard, which is just sort of an automated form maker. So let's click on that and drag a box onto the canvas. First thing it does is it asks us what we want to do. A wizard means it's going to walk us through a step-by-step process rather than us creating our own from scratch. So we'll use the wizard and have it walk us through. And we can create a form based on a template because there are a series of templates that we can use. So I'm going to click Next. And you'll see in the template list, you have a lot of options for forms. Now, since these are just templates, that means you can use them as they're designed here, or you can readjust their design. You can use them as is, or you can add more objects to them, change the way they look, remove fields, but they give you a starting point anyway. So let's pick one here, maybe a simple contact form, and we click Next. This is the list of objects on the form. There's an edit box called Name, another edit box called Email, and then a Submit button. An edit box is basically that field that people would type into. And there's the list of those objects. Again, we can add to it or edit these or change them here, or we can do it later in the drag and drop environment. For now, let's click Next, and it'll ask us what we want to do. What do you want to call this form? We want to call it Contact, or we can change that. The most important part of this whole form is actually the form action, and that's how this data, how this form should be processed. And most of the time, in fact, almost every time, you're going to want to choose using the built-in PHP form processor to send the data to an email address. That will be your email address that it comes to. These others are options that are rarer and more advanced. In almost every case, we're going to choose the PHP form processor. The email address that we put here needs to be your email address. This is something because this is an email you're going to get from one of your website visitors, so the software needs to know where to send it. The other important part of this needs to be an email address that obviously you've already created, but an email address that you've created on the same domain that this form lives on. So if this form was on the website for 90secondwebsitebuilder.com, the email address needs to be something at 90secondwebsitebuilder.com, and that something needs to be an actual email address. So Greg at 90secondwebsitebuilder.com or support at 90secondwebsitebuilder.com, etc. It needs to go to my email address on my website. The subject is something I'm going to see when it arrives. Remember, we're talking about an email that only you see as the website, as the webmaster. You're going to get these. So you can have this say, whatever you want, a form from my website or a form from a particular page, so you recognize it when it gets into your email box. The other really important part of this is the success URL. Now, what this has to do is what the end user sees when they fill out the form and they click the Submit button. Where do you want to take them once they have successfully filled out this form? And that's what the success URL is. You would click Select and you would find a page that your user will land on, a page that you've designed specifically for them to see when they submit a form. And if they make a mistake or they fill out the form wrong, if you want to have an error page that you've designed, you can make one of those and take them to that instead. So that's how you use the Form Wizard. I'm going to click Next and we're going to click Finish. And you're going to see something that's really important. This is a little reminder prompt that says you've enabled a feature that uses PHP scripting. Now, you can't use PHP script or PHP code on a page that's an HTML page. And so the software is helping you avoid a problem that's actually pretty common. People make this mistake all the time. And that is you need to change this file extension on this page. I'll show you what I mean. I'm just going to say OK. And what happens is we've got our form. It's all ready to go, except that we're doing this on a page that is an HTML page. I'm going to right click on the canvas, go to Page Properties, and show you what I mean. all pages default to this file extension HTML. But as soon as you put a form, because it's a PHP scripted object, as soon as you put a form on a page, it's important that you change this file extension to PHP. This is probably the #1 support question I get about forms. Why is my form not working, or why am I seeing funny code at the top of my page? It's because the person has failed to change the extension of this page to PHP. But it's easy to do, and I recommend doing it right away so you don't forget. Change it to PHP, click OK. Now the name of this page is whatever the name of the page is, .php instead of .html. And now the form will work. So we have a form that is made up of actually several objects here. Technically, it was just, we saw 3 things listed, but to be technical, the form actually has several objects. The first one is this box called the form area. Without the form area, this form would never work. Form objects, these objects in here, must be contained inside a form area. If anything's missing even by 1 pixel and is not in the form area, it won't work. So everything needs to be inside this form area. You also can't just put these out on the canvas anywhere and expect the form to work. They have to be enclosed in this. This form area is so important. It has its own settings. If we double click on it, this is really how the form processes. You'll recognize what we were just looking at before. This is where we determine how this form processes the data. The other objects it has, this is called an edit box. That's what people type into. There's a second one here. And then here's that submit button. And it has what's called the form label. This is just basically text, but technically it's called a label object, and it also belongs on this particular form. So if we were to build one of these from scratch, which I'll do, I'm going to delete this form that we just built with the wizard. I'm going to go to the toolbox over here where we saw the form wizard. Now we're going to grab a form area, and I'm going to draw a box. I can change the size of it later. And now this is basically my container for building my form. So let's put some things out here. So I'll put an edit box right here, and I'll put another edit box out here like this. And then I would put my submit button. Here's a button. We'll put it right here. And basically you can see I'm just rebuilding what I did in the wizard. But just for the sake of clarity, you can see you can build this from scratch. And then I put labels out here. Double click on this to call this whatever I want to call it. Then I could grab another one, or I can actually just do a copy paste on this one and then go change the label by double clicking on it. Call this email. And that's how we would build one from scratch. Now each one of these objects has their own settings, just like the form area. If you double click it, you get the form area settings. Each one of these objects has its own settings as well. So let's look at, if we double click on an edit box, we have some options. We can call it something. This is not anything the end user would see. This is something that you would end up seeing when you get the email, when this data is submitted to you. So you might want to call this something sensible, like name. And you can even have an initial value. This is the value that the end user would see when they fill out the form. So you can suggest to them, here's what I want you to put in this form. They would replace first name with their first name. There's some other things you can do here. Some of them are more advanced and are not as common, so we won't go over every little detail, but you should know that you can choose the type of information that must be put into this field. In this case, it's text, but there's other things. You could have this be, it has to be an email, it has to be a month, it has to be a number. The type of data that you're collecting can be selected here. So when people are typing in their password, it shows that hidden state so that nobody sees their password. Anyway, this is where you decide what type of data goes into the form field. Also, the style, background colors, you got borders and radiuses and fonts and all these kinds of things that make it look the way you want it to look. So it doesn't always have to look this plain. You can have shadows and control how that looks. There's this tab called Validate, and this is really important. By default, an object like this, an edit box, has no constraints and has no particular mode, just default plain mode. However, you can change this. For example, you might want to force someone to fill in this data a particular way. Right now, there's no constraints, but if you say, now, this form must be text, it can't be anything else but text, then you can say that here. And you can say, what kind of text format do you allow? Letters, I allow white space, I allow digits, that kind of thing. You can also decide if there should be a minimum amount of data. And by checking this box and say, there's got to be at least 2 characters in here, and I don't want any more than 12. These are called constraints, and this is how you control how the end user would fill out this particular box. And if they do it wrong, you can have an error message up here that says, oops, you need to do that again. I require a certain amount of data, blah, blah, blah. And you would have an error message that comes up that says, try again. That's what the validation tab does. It allows you to create these different forms of validation. And text is just one data type. If you wanted to use an email address, then that's what they must type in to this field. So validation is actually a really important and cool feature in creating forms and helping your visitors not make mistakes when they fill in these forms that they're sending to you. Conditions is another topic all to itself that will have its own video. But basically, conditions add a functionality to your form that's very, very powerful. We'll talk about in another tutorial. Events can be triggered with forms, and also CSS3 animation can be used with a form. So that's just kind of an overview of how you would build a form. So what I'd like to do now is give you a practical example of a form. Let me show you one that I actually use. So we're going to go to my testimonials page. Now, this is a page there. I get lots of emails and notes from people thanking me for the software, which is really nice. And so one of the ways they do that, sometimes they just do it as they submit a support ticket, but one of the ways they do is they come to the testimonials page where they read what people have said, and they fill out this form where I'm collecting their name and their email address and what they want to say. And they write their little story about how much they like the software. So let me show you what that form looks like. We're going to go to its settings, and you'll recognize some of the things that we chose before. So I'm using the built-in PHP form processor script. I'm typing in an email address I want it to be sent to. That means this particular form, if I was to use this form, I need to make sure that this form lives on the blackwiremarketing.com website. If I was going to use this form on the 90-second website builder website, that's what this email address would need to be. It would need to say 90secondwebsitebuilder.com because the email address that it's going to come to needs to match the domain where the form lives. And then I would have a subject line, testimonials. Remember, I'm the one that sees this email. It's not something the public sees. It's something that they fill out and send to me. And the message, whatever I want it to say, a value submitted from the form, I can change this. And then this is the page I want someone to go to after they filled out the form. Now, this is actually not the right one, so I'm going to change this right now. I have a page I want them to go to. This is the testimonials page we're on. And the reason why the testimonials page is a PHP page is because there's a form on it. But I want them to be taken to a thank you page. So let me go find that page. It's actually called Thanks Form. And so now when somebody fills out the form, clicks submit, I'll get an email. They'll be taken to a page that thanks them for what they just did, which is actually an HTML page because there are no PHP objects on that page. If they make a mistake, I could have them taken to an error page. But for now, let's just click OK and let's go look at it. I want you to see the thank you page that they would come to. It's called Thanks Form. It's just a very simple, generic thank you for submitting your information and then some more information about this product. I can actually use this form for other forms on my page. That's why it's generic looking. So I can have one thanks form or one thank you page for multiple forms and just send them to this generic thank you page if I want to. Or you can make a special thank you page for a specific form. It's completely up to you and depends on the situation. So one of the things I want to point out, and again, there needs to be more videos about some of these topics because forms can become very elaborate and extensive, and I'm showing you the basic overview of the use of forms. But 90-Second Website Builder actually has multiple ways for you to make forms. Aside from the form area tool or using the form wizard and putting form objects into it, there are some objects, other objects that can be turned into forms. One of those is, in fact, a layer. I'll show you how that works. I'm going to move this form area. I'm going to go to the layer tool here. And if you're familiar with layers, and if you're not, you should watch a video about layers so you see what they are. There is actually a feature in a layer setting, I'm in a layer right now, that says form. That means any place I've placed a layer, I can just go here, click this tab, click this button, and now this layer has become a form area. It means it can have all the objects in it that a layer normally has, but I can also now put some of those form objects into the layer and process it just like I would a form area. Very good trick. Now, there's another object you can do that with, and that is a layout grid. And in fact, that's what I was doing over here on my testimonials page. You may not have noticed this unless you're really paying close attention, but this is not a form area or a layer. I was able to put these objects into the layout grid because a layout grid is another thing I can use and turn it into a form. So this grid contains some text and background. It's a 3-column grid, but in my center column, I've turned it into a form. Here's how I did it. I'm going to double click on the layout grid. Here we are, layout grid. Here's my 3 columns. But you'll notice it also has a tab called form. And because I checked this box, this layout grid is also a form. And here is its settings. We just looked at those a second ago. That's what we were looking at. All that to say, forms are really easy to use. They're easy to set up, and there's multiple ways to do them. This video shows you kind of the basic get started with forms, but look for other form videos in my video tutorial library where we talk about some other things you can do with forms that are more complex and some things you can do that are very powerful as you're building websites with 90 Second Website Builder.